Hi, I'm JJ. Welcome back. Today I'm going to be participating in Steinbeck Summer. I know that everybody's reading Grapes of Wrath and or uh, East of Eden, but I've already read both of those, but I was actually still wanting to participate just because I read a couple of Steinbeck's shorter stories and I wanted to share them. I was going to do a video with all three that I was reading, The Red Pony, The Pearl, and The Moon is Down. But there was so much that I wanted to talk about just with this book that I'm going to do a separate video. So I could probably talk about this book longer than it took me to read it. It's very short. But it's not that so much happens, it's just such a meaningful piece of work. First of all, so The Moon is Down is John Steinbeck's reaction to fascists, the Nazis taking over in Germany. So he wrote this in 1942. He was so against fascism and the rise of it, and he took the title from a Shakespeare quote from Macbeth. So The Moon is Down was a reference or almost like foreshadowing to evil overtaking the kingdom, which then was what he viewed Nazis as their evil descending over Europe. And so what was interesting about this is, so Steinbeck first wanted to write it as a warning to Americans, but his publishers would not let him print anything where they felt like Americans could be demoralized by reading a book about being defeated. So he was still encouraged, because at the time he was meeting with a lot of displaced people from a lot of the occupied countries in Europe, and so he was talking to all these refugees, and they said, you know, you have to tell this story. It's a really important story. And so he said it, rather than America, an unnamed country that's representative of any of the occupied countries in Europe. And so the idea that he did this was what he wanted to humanize the Nazis, not in the way of like sympathizing or having us empathize with this fascist regime, but he actually wanted to humanize them in the way that they are humans. They're just regular, everyday people doing horrible things, but they're still just regular people who therefore can be defeated. And so, my cat is playing right now, and I apologize. So he just wanted to show that resistance is important. You have to fight against this. You can defeat them if you don't give up. Rather than having people think that the Nazis were this unbeatable machine, that, you know, this godlike entity who could never be defeated and impossible to destroy, is why he wanted to humanize them, show them that they were just everyday people struggling. They were people who were occupying this country that they didn't want to be in. They didn't understand their leaders' reasons for being there. They didn't understand some of their orders, but they still did them. They were still there. And so it just makes them fallible, and it makes them not this mythic mythic monster. So what was so great about that is the very thing that the American publishers didn't want him to do were what the occupied countries, the populations within those countries needed. And so he went against what he was told, and he fought for it, and he got it published. But it couldn't make it over to the people that he wanted to help, because they, book bans, they were, stopping anything that could incite violence, incite rebellion. And so it became this underground phenomenon where people were against the fact that they could get killed themselves. Like, they hid downstairs in their own printing presses and like just printed copies of this paper, of this book, so that they could try to sneak it across lines to give it to the people that they thought needed the inspiration, needed the extra strength to keep on fighting. And so they parachuted it over across lines. They had people smuggle it across lines when they were visiting family, and it just is spread. And it made them want to fight, and it gave them the power that they needed to realize that they could do it. And so it is such an important piece of work that I feel is never talked about, especially in today's world, where we need to know that resistance is possible. And so what was interesting as I read the introduction, that I never really realized that Steinbeck actually volunteered, because he was so concerned about the spread of fascism, that he volunteered with two government organizations that eventually became the CIA. So the OSS and the COI, and one was the Office of Coordinator of Information, and the other one was Office of Strategic Services. And so they became the CIA. And so that's how he started getting in contact a lot of times with these refugees, and getting their stories, and finding out what was really going on over there. And this book was his response to that. And so, like I said, it's so simplistic. It's an unknown city. A group of people come in and occupy them. And they just don't give up. So it kind of is slow going, but the end was absolutely phenomenal, because, they just don't understand the populace that they think that they overtook. They think that, like, we'll just kill the person in charge, and that will be fine. We'll cut off the head of the snake, and we won't have any kind of resistance. But he made a really good point in here, that with herd mentality, that works because you're following one person and one ideology. With freemen, which were all the resistance fighters, there is no single leader. You have a group of just regular everyday individuals who just want to fight against this evil, who don't want to give up, who don't care if they die, because they know that fighting was worth it. And so if they kill a leader, somebody else is just gonna take up that mantle, and they're just gonna keep going. And that was just something that the two sides just didn't understand about themselves. And another thing that was very interesting is not interesting, it's just very relevant. But so one of the occupiers says, we told them that they were brighter and braver than other young men. So he's talking about his own soldiers, because they're starting to fray at the edges, because they thought this was going to be this easy town to take over, and it was going to help them take over the whole country type of thing. And so now that they're meeting a little resistance, they're not quite understanding why. They don't get it. And so we told them they were brighter and braver than other young men. It was kind of a shock to them to find out they weren't a bit brighter or braver than other young men. And so it's just a simple line, but it just kind of shows that these oppressors, they go into a place and they're told that they're better. They're told that, they're not going to fight you. They're told that, they're inhuman. They're told that, you are the greatest, and nothing can stand in your way type of thing. And that's very relevant now. It was also relevant in the 40s when this book was happening, with how Hitler and his regime talked about the people that they were extinguishing, not just the Jews, but the whole population. They dehumanized, and now it's the same rhetoric that Israel is using with the Palestinians, and what our government in the United States is using against immigration and stuff here, by trying to dehumanize and put one group or one race or one religion or whatever above everybody else. And so just in that simple line, like he gets it. He said, without even having to say, like, he used a lot less words than I just did right there. And then another thing that was so fascinating is the very end. The mayor who's been trying to resist, he quotes the apology, Socrates' apology, written by Plato. And so he's talking about, like how I said before, you can cut me down, but you're not going to, end the movement. You're just going to make it stronger. And the idea that writing can not only inspire that kind of way, but how ancient texts can still have relevance today. So Cato, the Roman Cato, there was a play called Cato, a Tragedy. And that play was so popular during, the 1700s that it inspired the people fighting in the American Revolution. There was even Washington had it played on the battlefield to try to bring up morale and stuff to his people under his command. So it was just the idea that these, like, how universal reading is. And I think we lose a lot of that with, like, I'm not complaining, I love reading and I'll read anything. But with so many choices nowadays, you're missing out on the fact that you could write a book with a title, The Moon is Down, and most people at this time knew it was a Shakespeare reference. A Sound and Fury, also Macbeth, Shakespeare reference, William Faulkner. Steinbeck also has The Winter of Our Discontent. I forget which Shakespeare play that is, but it is also another Shakespeare play. And so they used Shakespeare a lot in their titles, you picked it up and you already knew kind of what the themes of the book were going to do. Sometimes they used it subversively so that you thought it was going to go one way, and it didn't always go the way that you were expecting. But you actually have this expectation because most of your audience would have immediately recognized what that title represented. The same with all the biblical titles, Steinbeck in particular, East of Eden. You pick up that book, you're going to know it's a biblical reference. The fact that that entire book is a retelling of Cain and Abel in 2 generations, and the fall of Adam. You have literally the evil incarnate Eve as a character with Kathy. You know these references because there weren't a whole lot of book choices. Everybody was reading very much the same thing. In Victorian times with Dickens and Austen and all those books, when they make references, they're making references to books that everybody else would have also had access. Especially when, at that time, with Dickens and even with Alexander Dumas, they were printing serials. So they were printing chapter by chapter in the newspaper where pretty much everyone had access to it. So it was this thing that just everybody was talking about. You didn't have to read it to know and understand the context of what was being said. And so later on, when people started making references, they knew that, even illiterate people who might somehow have access to hearing about this will get this title. They'll get this quote. They'll get this reference. And we can't do that very much now because people aren't familiar with all of the same things. I could use Steinbeck in a quote of a book, and, non-American audiences who aren't as familiar with all of Steinbeck's works would not be able to get that reference. You have a lot of, biblical references, but what about people who read the Quran or who don't read the Bible at all? So you have just so few things, especially when now people, what they consider classics are different based on, your country of origin. So you might not even have access to the same classics that we assume everybody should be able to read. Not to mention also most people are no longer multilingual. So you had people, Napoleon would carry around, the important books part of his library. And it was just stuff that every well-educated person or well-read person, like, you just knew that they were reading these certain books. And gosh, if you could read the books from the language, the languages of origin, without even needing to wait for a translation and stuff, then you had that. And now we have so many great books that need to wait for translation so other audiences can read them and experience them. Especially when some of the books are fantastic, but if the translation is lacking, then the appreciation for that book is just not going to be what it deserves, because it doesn't translate well across cultures, across languages, until you can find a way to make it more universal. And so I think that's fascinating, how much we've changed, because, this was in 42. Yes, it was, over 80 years ago, but it also, it wasn't that long ago to have moved so far beyond that. Even things that are really popular, some people just don't understand, because it's there's so many genres of books, and some of them are considered more universal than others, but then some of them are considered more niche, and some even consider fantasy or romance, they're not considered as highbrow enough or whatever, when that was not the case back then. We considered Jane Austen and stuff, we consider them classics, but they're romances. And now there's this negative connotation of using the romance genre today that was not around when we're thinking about the classics. Why haven't you read Jane Austen? Like, everybody reads Jane Austen, but then if you can't really hold a candle to anything nowadays and say, this is the one romance that everyone needs to read. And so, not to say that that's the only way to compare, but it's just interesting how so many extra choices is actually taken away from a universal reading experience for people. And you can read this book just as the book itself. I still think that the ending was phenomenal. But when you take it into account of what he was trying to do and how he had to try to tell a story without telling what was actually going on and using the names he wanted to use and all that stuff, he made it a more universal story, in the sense that he was talking about 42, but he could very well be talking about 2025 or any other, just because, with the rise and fall of occupied countries, or fascism rising and falling. And so he, in a way, made it universal. And yet I never hear anyone talking about it. So it's still not overly universal, because with the paradox of choice, people don't know what they don't know. And some people, just for this take alone, people are picking his well-known works, his best works. I mean, East of Eden is one of my all-time favorite books, so I am not even going to complain about that. But what about all the minor works that get forgotten, and will just fall away and never be talked about, and it's a real shame, just because I believe it is necessary, and it matters. And as simplistic as it is, there was also some beauty in it. I just really liked this description here, so I wanted to share it right as I'm closing. But in the dark, clear night, a white, half-withered moon brought little light. The wind was dry and singing over the snow, a quiet wind that blew steadily, evenly from the cold point of the pole. Over the land, the snow lay very deep and dry as sand. He was able to make very beautiful language and descriptions, and yet very minimal words in general. And there's not a whole lot of action that happens, but it's just still such a profound, moving, inspirational story, especially when you get to why he wrote it and how hard it was to get it into the hands of the people who needed it to keep fighting. And so that's especially important today as well, when we have so many book bannings and so many people wanting to rewrite history and not talk about, the hard stuff. And so it's just a reminder that everyday people can still find a way to stand up, to fight, and not let the moon go down.